lot of AI landing pages still look generic for one simple reason. The workflow starts with no visual direction. Most people are still doing the same thing. They ask for a landing page, list a few sections, maybe say make it modern, and expect the tool to figure out the rest. But that kind of prompt only defines the layout. It doesn't define the design language, it doesn't define the taste, and it doesn't define what should actually make the page feel distinct. So the result is usually fast, structured, and usable, but it still ends up feeling too familiar. Because the AI is being asked to build a strong visual system from almost nothing. But the moment you change that starting point, the quality shifts immediately. Because now, instead of starting from a basic prompt alone, the builder has a real visual foundation, a strong HTML reference, and a DESIGN.md file that carries the design language, the system, and the direction into the next result. And I think this is where a lot of people misunderstand AI design. Most of these builders are actually very good at generating an output. It can give you a hero section, feature blocks, testimonial, pricing, FAQs, all of that very quickly. But speed and structure are not the same thing as taste, and that's usually where the gap starts to show. Because when you start from a blank prompt or basic prompt, you're asking the tool to do two jobs at once. First, build the page. Second, invent a strong visual direction from scratch. And that second part is much harder. A good-looking result usually needs better starting material, stronger inspiration, better references, a clearer design language, something the tool can actually build from instead of guessing. That's why I think the smarter workflow is not to start from zero. It's to start from something visually strong, then remix and iterate from there. And that's exactly where Neuform becomes interesting. If your goal is to find strong UI inspiration and generate a design.md file, Neuform is one of the best places to do it. In fact, Neuform is even featured inside Google Stitch as one of the resources for finding these design.md file, which is a pretty nice signal of how useful this workflow is becoming. So a design.md file is basically the design direction translated into something AI tools can understand. The visual language, the styling logic, the system, the overall feel of the interface. And that's the key here. Neuform is not really a tool I'd use to generate a full landing page from start to finish. Its real strength is helping you find a much better visual starting point. You can generate a UI from a reference or screenshot, remix on top of remix, and move quickly towards something that actually has potential. Instead of spending time on weak direction, you focus on the idea that already feels strong and refine those further. That makes the workflow much more about fast component exploration than full page generation. And that's a big advantage. The other big advantage is the community. If you're still learning AI design, it gives you access to a lot of strong inspiration you can legally remix and build from. That's not cheating, that's the actual workflow. And once you get the design.md from something strong, you can bring that direction into almost any AI builder like Aura, Lovable, Base 44, Stitch, Cloud Design, and the whole workflow still works. So for me, Neuform is not the final builder, it's where the visual direction gets stronger. So let me show you what that actually looks like in practice. This time, I'm not testing this on some weak generic layout from a basic prompt. I'm using one of my own templates, something I already put real work into. The layout is more intentional, the typography is more considered, the components already have some quality, and the page already has a visual style. So this is a better test. Because if this workflow can meaningfully improve something that already looks decent, then that says a lot. For the first example, I found an inspiration inside Neuform that I think fits the direction of this template really well. So I download two things, the design.md file and the HTML file. Then I use a very simple prompt like adapt this layout exactly, do not change anything, and apply the visual DNA using these two attached files. So I attached it DESIGN.md and the HTML, hit enter, and let's see what happens. And right away, you can see the shift. It keeps the structure of my original layout, it keeps the content, it keeps the section, but the visual styling now picks up the DNA of the inspiration. At first glance, most of it works really well. The only thing that feels a bit off is the animated background, because mine is still purple and it doesn't match the new direction perfectly. But that's a minor fix. The important part is that the transfer itself worked. So then I try a second example. This time I stay in dark mode, but I go with a more yellow tone palette because I think it fits the template even better. Same process again, download the DESIGN.md, download the HTML, attach both files, use the same prompt, and run it. And once again, the transformation is really strong. The visual DNA from the inspiration gets applied to the layout, but all of my sections are still there, all of the content is still intact, and the overall structure doesn't fall apart. So to me, that's the proof. This is not just a workflow for fixing bad generic pages. It also works when you already have a decent layout and you want to push the style much further, much faster. And that's what makes this so powerful. You can take a visual language you didn't create from scratch, transfer it into your own layout, and get a much stronger result with surprisingly little effort. Then over time, you just refine the workflow, get better at choosing stronger inspiration, and the result keep improving from there. So once you see that working, the next question becomes, how do you actually build a strong design.md file and bring it into another builder? In Neuform, there are really two ways to get strong inspiration. The first is to create your own variation. The second is to extract something that already looks polished from the community. I'll show you both, but first I just want to say this quickly. If you're brand new to Neuform, the interface can feel a bit overwhelming at first. There's a lot of buttons, a lot of features, and a lot of different ways to interact with the tool. So I'm not going to break down every single option in this video. I already made a full 30-minute walkthrough of the platform where I explain what each button does and how the whole interface works. So if you want the deeper version, I'll link that above. For now, I just want to stay focused on the workflow. The first method is creating your own UI from a reference image. So I found an image with a layout that felt unique and visually strong, and I just save it locally. Then inside Neuform, you can drag that image directly into the canvas and a prompt box will appear. I like to start with a very simple prompt like recreate this layout exactly. And I really mean exactly, because if you want the first iteration to stay close to the source, that word matters. From there, you have two main options, iterate and remix. Iterate usually tries to stay much closer to the original layout. Remix gives the AI a little more freedom to explore. So I test both using the same image. With iterate, the layout gets reproduced very closely, which is great when the original structure already feels strong. And one thing I've noticed is that when Neuform is paired with Gemini 3.1, it's actually very good at reproducing layouts accurately. So if you want to build more original looking components, not just the same standard 4-card SAS section you see everywhere, this is a really strong way to start from a better foundation. Then I test the same image with Remix. It still stays fairly close to the source, but now the AI explores a little bit more. And in this case, I actually prefer that version. But once you have that first iteration, you shouldn't stop there, because at that stage, it can still feel a bit too close to the original reference. That's where remixing becomes the real workflow. Neuform has a remix with prompt feature, and this is where you can start pushing the direction further. You can describe changes in natural language, and you can also combine that with something called a skill, which is basically a reusable style or behavior preset that helps steer the AI toward a certain visual outcome. There are more than 50 public skills available at the moment, and that library will keep growing and growing. And what's nice is that each one has a thumbnail, so you can quickly get a visual sense of what it might do. You can also click into the prompt behind each skill if you want more detail. So for this example, I choose one called Blue Cloudy Clean Modern. Apply the skill and test both iterate and remix again. And then you have another option called Quick Remix. You cannot add a custom prompt and you can only apply one skill at a time. But if your goal is to create a bunch of variation quickly, this is probably one of the best features in the whole platform. So I take my first iteration, apply multiple different skills, and launch 6 jobs at once, which is the max. And now, instead of waiting around and overthinking one direction, I get a spread of strong variation very quickly. Once they're done, you can immediately see the value of this workflow. The original structure is still visible across the different results, but each variation now has its own style, its own mood, its own visual identity. And that's really the point: fast exploration, fast iteration, and a much better chance of landing on something strong without wasting time polishing weak directions. If one feels promising, you keep refining it: typography, images, colors, spacing, whatever needs to be pushed further. And once you finally have a version you're happy with, you click on the export option. This is where you can download the 2 files you actually need for the workflow: the design.md file and the HTML file. And that's the first method. You create your own variation, refine it until it feels right, and then export the file that would help transfer that design direction into another builder. The second method is using the community. And honestly, this is one of the biggest advantages of the platform. If you're not yet great at crafting beautiful UI yourself, you can simply find a layout you already like and use that as your starting point. So let's say you find a community design that looks really strong. If you open it and show the right sidebar, you can immediately see the design system. And from there, you can download the design.md file directly. The only limitation is that because it's not your creation, you can't download the HTML file. But there's a very simple workaround. What you do is take the community design and run it through Remix with Prompt feature. And the prompt should be recreate this layout exactly. The reason I use that wording is because I want the AI to reproduce something that is as close as possible to the original UI. Basically an almost duplicate version that now belongs to me as a new variation. One detail to pay attention here: make sure you remove any skill before running it. Neuform can keep the last skill or prompt behavior in memory, and if that stays active, it might recreate the layout and also apply an extra style on top of it, which is not what you want here. In this case, the goal is not to redo the design. The goal is to reproduce it as faithfully as possible. Once that generation is done, this new variation is now yours. And because it's your new variation, if you go to the export option, you now have access to both files, the design.md and the HTML. And now that we have the 2 files, we can move that visual direction into any builder. Earlier, I tested this workflow inside Aura, which is a tool I already know very well. And as you saw, once I applied the design.md and the HTML file, the results shifted immediately. But now I want to test that exact same idea in another builder, this time Lovable. I'm not deeply familiar with Lovable, so I'm going to keep this very simple and use the same kind of prompt that most people would normally start with. Something like create a full landing page for an AI wars platform with a hero, features, use cases, testimonial, any call to action. And that's it. The topic is here, the sections are there, but there's still no real visual direction for the AI to follow. So from here, the builder does what most AI builders do. It respects the prompt, gives you the structure, and fills in the rest with its own assumption. And that's usually where the generic feeling starts to show up. And here's the first iteration. Even though I selected the green palette, the page still leans heavily into purple. I got the hero in the section I asked for, but visually, this still feels pretty generic. So now let's apply the workflow. I click attach, include the design.md file and the HTML file, and use a prompt to transfer the visual direction. And this is also where I want to explain why I like attaching both files instead of just the design.md. Because the design.md gives the builder the design language, the colors, the styling logic, the general system. But the HTML helps show how that system is actually expressed in a real interface. A simple way to think about it is this. The design.md is like the ingredients and the HTML is like the recipe. If you only give the AI the ingredients, sometimes it gets the dish right, but sometimes it misses the balance completely. That's why I include both. It makes the transfer much more accurate. Without the HTML reference, the AI can understand the palette, but not always where and how to apply it well. For example, if the primary color is orange, sometimes it just starts pushing orange everywhere. Technically, it follows that direction, but visually, it doesn't feel control. I ran into that a lot when I first started testing this workflow, and that's exactly why I refine it this way. So the prompt I use here is something like recreate this layout exactly, do not change content, apply this visual DNA using these two attached files. I hit enter and the first iteration was not the expected result. But this is a useful mistake because technically the AI didn't fail. It just interpreted the wording differently than I intended. When I said recreate this layout, what I meant was keep the new landing page structure but apply the visual DNA from the attached file. But the AI interpreted that more literally and tried to recreate the HTML I attached as close as possible. So I revert to the previous version and try again, but this time I changed the wording slightly. Instead of saying recreate this layout exactly, I say adapt this layout exactly. Even more clearly, adapt this landing page exactly. That small wording change makes a big difference. And now you can see the result working much more the way I intended. The visual direction from Neuform is clearly there, keeps the animated background, the gradients, the typography, the overall mood, and even adds a nice animated element in the hero, which is actually a bonus. And at the same time, it still keeps the full landing page structure from my original prompt. So yes, the content is still pretty basic here because I kept the initial prompt simple on purpose, but that's fine. The goal is to prove that the visual DNA transfer is working. And once that's working, you can refine everything else from there, improve the section, upgrade the component, rewrite the content, and keep pushing the page further. So now we've seen this workflow work inside multiple AI builders and with good result. And I think the bigger takeaway is pretty simple. Neuform is not really the tool I'd use to generate a full landing page from start to finish. That's not its role. Its real strength is acting as the visual engine. It helps you find stronger inspiration, explore better direction faster, and generate a design.md file you can move into another builder. Then the builder becomes the assembly layer. That's the tool that takes the structure, the content, and the section and turns everything into a complete landing page. And together, that workflow is just much stronger. One tool helps you find the design language, the other helps you build the page. And I think that's a much smarter way to work with AI design right now. Because the hard part usually isn't generation anymore, it's visual direction. So for me, Neuform is not replacing the builder, it's upgrading what the builder starts from.